She thought she owned the sky. She thought rules didn't apply to her. But in less than an hour, she would walk off that plane stripped of everything she had built. Her authority, her career, her future. And the worst part? It wouldn't be the passengers, the crew, or even her own arrogance that would destroy her. It would be a single text message. But Sophia Marshall didn't know that yet. The early morning rush at LAX was as chaotic as ever. People hustled to their gates, coffee in one hand, carry-ons in the other, while departure announcements echoed through the massive terminal. Gate C-17 was unusually quiet, though. First-class boarding had begun, and among the passengers was Margaret Holloway, an elderly woman with the kind of presence that made people notice her, even if she never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She walked with a calm, unhurried grace, her neatly tailored coat draped over one arm, a leather handbag in the other. Her silver hair was pinned up elegantly, her posture flawless, like someone who had spent her life commanding respect without demanding it. She handed her ticket to the gate agent, who scanned it and gave her a warm nod. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Holloway. Enjoy your flight." But the moment she stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt it. A shift in the air, a silent weight pressing down. Sophia Marshall, the senior flight attendant, stood at the entrance of the first-class cabin, arms crossed, uniform crisp, her face a perfect mask of professionalism, except for her eyes. They flickered with something just a little too sharp, a little too assessing as they landed on Margaret. Margaret felt it immediately, the hesitation, the quick flicker of doubt. It wasn't the first time she had seen that look. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sophia said, stepping into Margaret's path. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Margaret held her gaze, unshaken, amused even. "I'm aware." Sophia's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. "May I see your ticket?" Margaret didn't hesitate. She held it out, calm as ever. Sophia scanned it, jaw tightening slightly when she saw the assigned seat, 1A. Everything in Sophia's posture screamed reluctance, but she stepped aside. "Enjoy your flight." Margaret walked past her without another word. The first-class cabin was already settled. A man in a tailored suit tapped away on his laptop. A young influencer adjusted her perfect lighting for an Instagram story. No one paid attention to the quiet older woman taking seat 1A. No one except Sophia. She hated when people like Margaret showed up in first class, people who didn't fit the image in her head. Sophia had worked hard to climb to this position. She ran this cabin. People respected her, listened to her. And yet, in the past few years, she had noticed something. Passengers didn't always look like first class anymore. And that irritated her. She took one last glance at Margaret before turning toward the galley. But something about the woman's calm, composed expression gnawed at her. She told herself she was just doing her job, that she was making sure everything was in order. But the tightness in her chest, that was something else. It was control slipping through her fingers. 15 minutes passed. The final passengers boarded. Overhead bins shut. The pilot's voice rumbled over the speakers. "Flight time to New York will be 5 hours and 15 minutes. Sophia should have let it go, should have moved on, but she didn't. Instead, she walked back down the aisle with purpose. Stopping at seat 1A, she leaned down, voice just a little too polite. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry, but there seems to be a mistake with your seat assignment." Margaret slowly looked up. She didn't speak right away, just studied Sophia for a beat too long. Then, "A mistake?" Sophia nodded firmly. "Yes, this seat," she paused, carefully choosing her words, "is usually reserved for certain clientele." A loaded silence stretched between them. Passengers shifted. Some glanced over, but quickly looked away. Margaret folded her hands in her lap, voice steady as stone. "And what kind of clientele would that be?" Sophia hesitated. It was the first crack in her armor. Before she could answer, a younger flight attendant, Laura, approached from the galley. "Everything okay here?" she asked, voice light but wary. Sophia straightened, forcing a tight smile. "No problem at all. I was just—" Margaret didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give Sophia the reaction she wanted. Instead, she reached down, picked up her phone, and typed something. A simple text message. One that, in exactly 20 minutes, would rip the floor out from under Sophia's world. But she didn't know that yet. Because in that moment, Sophia made a mistake. A split-second decision that would change everything. She grabbed Margaret's arm. It happened too fast, too reckless. A sharp gasp rippled through first class. Passengers froze. A man across the aisle's eyes widened in shock. Sophia felt it the moment her fingers wrapped around Margaret's wrist. The silence, the kind that only came when someone had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Margaret turned her head slowly, the look in her eyes, not anger, not fear, just quiet disappointment. A cold weight settled in Sophia's chest. She had made a terrible mistake, and she hadn't even realized who she had just put her hands on. The silence was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The tension in the first-class cabin thickened like a storm cloud about to break. Sophia's hand was still wrapped around Margaret's wrist, but something about the way the older woman looked at her made her feel like she was the one being held in place. Margaret didn't yank her arm back. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, her eyes calm, unreadable. Sophia's heart pounded against her ribs. Her grip loosened, just slightly, but the damage had already been done. A single action, impulsive and reckless, had thrown her entire sense of control into freefall. Margaret slowly tilted her head, her voice quiet, steady. "Would you like to explain what you just did?" Sophia blinked. The words weren't loud, but they sliced through the cabin with precision. She let go immediately, stepping back, heat rushing to her face. I was just trying to make sure there were no seat discrepancies," she stammered, her voice cracking ever so slightly. Margaret held her gaze for another agonizing second, then, without a word, turned her attention back to her phone. Another short message. Another quiet click of the screen locking. A chill ran down Sophia's spine. Laura, the younger flight attendant, took an uneasy step forward. "Sophia," she murmured under her breath, just loud enough for her to hear. Sophia shot her a sharp look. "Not now." Laura hesitated, then quickly retreated. She had seen enough. They all had. Passengers weren't pretending not to watch anymore. Some still kept their eyes averted, but a few were now openly staring. A man 2 rows back had his phone in his lap, camera angled just slightly too high to be anything but a recording. Sophia inhaled sharply. This wasn't good. She turned, forcing her usual air of authority back into place. "Excuse me," she said, straightening her uniform, trying to reassert control over the situation. "I have duties to attend to," and without another word, she spun on her heel and strode toward the galley. The moment she was out of sight, she exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter as if it could steady her. Get it together. She was Sophia Marshall. She ran this cabin. This was her domain. Her mind raced. She needed to fix this before it spiraled. Margaret was just another passenger, an entitled one, sure, but still just a passenger. Maybe the woman was wealthy. Maybe she had influence. But what was she going to do? File a complaint? Complaints happened all the time. Sophia had dealt with worse, but something about the way Margaret had looked at her, the way she had sent that text. Sophia clenched her jaw. No, she refused to be intimidated by some old woman who thought a first-class seat made her untouchable. She just needed to get through the flight. 30 minutes passed. The plane had reached cruising altitude. The hum of the engines filled the air, and the usual rhythm of the cabin had settled in. Sophia had forced herself back into her routine, making sure meals were distributed, drinks were served, and everything remained exactly as it should be. But something felt off. Every time she passed seat 1A, she felt it, that presence, that quiet, steady energy that Margaret carried, like a weight pressing down on the air around her. The other passengers noticed too. They weren't as chatty as they usually were. Even the ones who hadn't seen the incident earlier could feel something wasn't quite right. Then, just as Sophia was refilling a drink order, Laura appeared again, eyes wide, whispering urgently. "Sophia," she said, her voice low but urgent, "you need to go to the cockpit, now." Sophia froze. "What?" "The captain wants to see you, right now." Something cold settled in Sophia's stomach. This wasn't normal. The captain never called her up mid-flight unless it was an emergency. She handed the drink order off without a word and marched toward the front of the plane, heart pounding. When she stepped into the cockpit, Captain Owen Clark was waiting for her. He wasn't alone. One of the lead corporate representatives from the airline was on the other side of the call screen, face unreadable. The screen was muted for now, but Sophia knew deep down this was bad. The captain's expression was unreadable as he gestured for her to close the door behind her. She did, swallowing hard. "Sophia," he said, his voice measured, "do you know who's sitting in seat 1A? She hesitated. The way he asked the question sent a ripple of dread through her chest. She shook her head, lips tightening. Just another passenger. Captain Clark exhaled through his nose. His fingers tapped against the control panel for a moment before he finally turned to her fully. Her name is Margaret Holloway. He let the name settle between them for a beat before continuing. And she's the wife of Ethan Holloway. The weight of those words hit Sophia like a freight train. She felt her pulse stop. Ethan Holloway. As in the Ethan Holloway, the billionaire, the man who owned the airline. Her throat went dry. The captain let that sink in for another moment, then nodded toward the muted screen. He's on this call, and he's not happy. Sophia's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out, because at that moment she finally understood. That text Margaret had sent, it wasn't to a friend, it wasn't to a lawyer. It had been sent directly to the man who had the power to end her career in an instant. And judging by the look on Captain Clark's face, that was exactly what was about to happen. Sophia's body went cold. Her mind scrambled for a way out, a way to explain, to justify, to turn this into something salvageable. But there was no getting around it. She had made a mistake, a massive one, and the man staring back at her through the screen was not the kind of person who forgave mistakes. Captain Clark finally unmuted the call. The voice that came through the speakers was controlled even, but sharp enough to cut through steel. "I assume she knows who I am now?" Sophia stiffened. The weight of Ethan Holloway's words crushed any last shred of arrogance she had left. She forced herself to nod, but she couldn't meet his gaze. "Good," Ethan continued. "Then let's not waste time, Captain. What exactly happened on that plane?" Clark hesitated just for a moment, then spoke, his voice careful. "Sir, there was an incident, a misunderstanding between one of our crew members and your wife." Ethan let out a breath that sounded more like a warning than an exhale. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, then after a beat. "Tell me, Miss Marshall, do misunderstandings usually involve physically putting hands on a passenger?" Sophia's stomach twisted. She tried to speak, but her throat felt like it had closed up. This was the moment. If she said the wrong thing, her career was over. She swallowed hard, keeping her voice as level as possible. "Mr. Holloway, there was never any intention of harm. I was simply trying to enforce seating policies, and Mrs. Holloway refused to cooperate." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then finally, he let out a small, humorless chuckle. "Enforce seating policies on my wife in first class." Sophia wanted to disappear. Clark's eyes flickered toward her, as if silently telling her to stop talking before she made it worse. Ethan's voice dropped lower. "Miss Marshall, let me make something clear. I don't care about apologies. I don't care about excuses. What I care about is that you, one of my senior flight attendants, thought you had the authority to decide who belongs in my airline's first-class cabin. You thought you had power. You thought you were untouchable, but you were wrong." Sophia's nails dug into her palms. "Sir, I understand that you don't understand." Ethan cut her off. "Not yet, but you will?" The call ended. For a moment, the cockpit was dead silent except for the hum of the engines. Sophia's breath came in shallow bursts. Her entire body felt hot and cold at the same time. She turned to Captain Clark, expecting some kind of reassurance, some kind of buffer, but his expression was unreadable. Finally, he exhaled through his nose and leaned back in his chair. "I don't know what's going to happen when we land," he admitted. "But if I were you, I'd start preparing for the worst." Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came, because deep down she already knew. Her world was about to come crashing down. Sophia stood frozen in the cockpit, her mind racing through every possible scenario, every excuse, every way out. But there wasn't one. Ethan Holloway didn't need to yell or threaten. His tone alone made it clear. This wasn't a warning. It was a sentence. She forced herself to breathe, gripping the edge of the doorframe like it could somehow anchor her to reality. Captain Clark hadn't spoken since his last words, and he wasn't looking at her anymore. That was worse than anything. The way he had already checked out, already accepted what was coming. But Sophia wasn't ready to. She turned, her movement sharp and controlled, and marched back into the galley. She needed to do something, anything, to regain control. She couldn't let this flight become her funeral. Laura was waiting near the beverage cart, and the second she saw Sophia, she straightened. She must have overheard the call because there was something new in her expression, pity. Sophia clenched her jaw. She didn't need pity. She needed an escape. "Stay out of my way," she snapped, pushing past her. Laura hesitated, then nodded stiffly. She didn't argue. She didn't even look surprised. That made Sophia's stomach twist. Had she been like this all along? She shook the thought away. There wasn't time for self-reflection. Not now. She straightened her uniform, took a slow breath, and stepped back into the cabin. Passengers glanced up as she walked past. Some of them looked away immediately, but others didn't. Some were watching. They had seen everything. They knew. Sophia pushed forward, her pulse pounding. The air felt different now, heavier. Normally, she could walk through first class like she owned it, but not this time. This time it felt like she was walking towards something she couldn't control. When she reached seat 1A, she stopped. Margaret was exactly where she had left her, calm, composed, unbothered. The way she held herself, the way she didn't react, only made Sophia's anger flare. She cleared her throat. "Mrs. Holloway." Margaret finally looked up. For the first time, Sophia felt small. It wasn't anything Margaret said. It wasn't even the look in her eyes. It was the silence. That unwavering, patient silence that made Sophia's own words feel meaningless before they even left her lips. Sophia forced herself to keep going. "I want to apologize for—" Margaret raised a single hand. Sophia stopped mid-sentence. "I don't need your apology," Margaret said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't need you to explain. I don't need you to fix anything." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Margaret leaned forward just slightly, lowering her voice so only Sophia could hear. "What I needed," she said, "was for you to treat me with respect before you knew my last name." The words landed like a punch. Sophia swallowed hard, but there was nothing to say. She knew it. Margaret knew it. Everyone knew it. And as Sophia stood there, grasping for anything, the PA system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent into New York." Sophia felt her stomach drop. It was happening. She was out of time. Sophia's breath felt shallow as she turned away from Margaret, forcing herself to move even though her legs felt heavier with every step. The final descent announcement had changed everything. She had minutes left, minutes before the plane touched down, minutes before she faced whatever was waiting for her on the other side of that jet bridge. The air in the cabin felt suffocating now. She could feel the passengers watching her, even if most of them pretended not to. She could feel the weight of her mistake settling over her like an invisible noose. She reached the galley and gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Laura was still there, standing stiffly by the beverage cart, pretending to organize cups that didn't need organizing. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "You should start thinking about what you're going to say when we land." Sophia's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me." Laura turned, and for the first time, she didn't look nervous. She looked steady, like she had already accepted the outcome that Sophia was still desperately trying to outrun. "To them," Laura clarified, nodding toward the front of the plane. "The corporate team, security, whoever's waiting for you." Sophia let out a sharp breath. "I don't need you to tell me how to handle this." Laura hesitated, then sighed, shaking her head. "No," she said, "I guess you don't." The words shouldn't have stung, but they did. Sophia turned away, heart hammering. She could still fix this. She had to. Her mind scrambled for a plan. Deny, defend, apologize. None of them felt right. None of them felt like enough. Then a voice from behind made her stomach twist. "You should sit down." Sophia spun around. Margaret was standing in the galley now, calm as ever, hands folded in front of her. She wasn't looking at Sophia with anger. She wasn't looking at her with anything really. Sophia hated that. "Excuse me?" she said, the words sharper than intended. Margaret's head tilted slightly. "You're not the one in control anymore," she said simply, "and fighting it won't change what's coming." Sophia felt her pulse spike. "And what exactly do you think is coming?" Margaret held her gaze for a long moment. Then she sighed softly, as if Sophia had asked the wrong question. "You already know." The word sent a chill through Sophia's spine. Margaret turned, walking back toward her seat. But before she sat down, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. "Good luck, Miss Marshall." Sophia stood there frozen as the plane began its final descent. She was out of time, and she had never felt more powerless in her life. The wheels touched the runway with a dull thud, the plane jolting slightly as it slowed. The usual murmurs of relief spread through the cabin, the quiet shifting of passengers unbuckling their seatbelts, the rustling of bags being pulled from under seats. But in first class, no one moved. Sophia sat rigid in the galley, fingers gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles ached. The final descent had felt like an execution march, every minute dragging her closer to whatever was waiting beyond the cabin doors. She exhaled sharply. She wasn't out yet. There had to be a way to control the damage. Maybe Holloway wouldn't make this public. Maybe she could still talk her way through this, keep her job, keep her reputation. The moment the plane slowed to a full stop, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated until the captain turns off the fasten seatbelt sign." It was routine. The same speech she'd heard 1,000 times, but this time, it wasn't just another landing. This was the last moment before her life changed permanently. The seatbelt sign dinged off, a single moment of stillness. Then, the forward cabin doors unlocked. Sophia's stomach twisted violently. She didn't need to step outside to know there were already people waiting for her. She forced herself to stand, keeping her movement smooth, practiced. She wouldn't walk out there looking weak. No matter what happened, she refused to look weak. Laura glanced at her from across the galley, but she didn't say anything. Sophia didn't need words to know what she was thinking. This was over. The cabin doors swung open. Two men in black suits stepped inside. Sophia froze. They weren't TSA. They weren't regular airline staff. They had the sharp, precise posture of corporate security. The taller one glanced toward first class, scanning the passengers. He spotted Margaret immediately. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, giving a polite nod. "Welcome to New York. Mr. Holloway is waiting for you outside." Margaret smiled graciously. "Thank you, Paul." Paul. Sophia felt something in her chest tighten. The man was on a first-name basis with her. Of course he was. The second man, shorter but just as intimidating, turned to Sophia. "Miss Marshall," he said, his tone clipped. "You need to come with us." The words punched the air from her lungs. She forced herself to hold her ground. "I have responsibilities to—" "Not anymore," the man interrupted. He held up a tablet, its screen angled just enough for her to see. She barely registered the words at first. Then her stomach dropped. The document on the screen was her termination letter. Not a warning, not a suspension, immediate termination. Sophia's fingers curled into fists. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You can't just—" Paul's expression didn't change. "Mr. Holloway has already made the decision. Your employment with this airline is officially terminated as of landing. We'll need you to surrender your company badge and ID before leaving the aircraft." A sharp ringing filled Sophia's ears. It wasn't just that she was being fired. It was how easily it had happened. No meeting, no HR process, no chance to defend herself. One text, one mistake. And just like that, her entire career had been erased. She felt the eyes on her now. Passengers, crew, watching, judging. Margaret had already risen from her seat, pulling her bag over her shoulder with effortless grace. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't needed to. Sophia's breath came fast and uneven. This wasn't happening. This wasn't happening, but it was. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Sophia stood frozen in place, her entire body rigid as the reality of what was happening crashed down on her like a tidal wave. This wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a warning. It was an execution. And it had already been decided before she even stepped off the plane. Her mind raced. Fight it, push back, say something, anything. But what could she say? She had no leverage, no power, no control. The two men in suits didn't move, didn't blink. They were waiting, expecting compliance, expecting her to crumble. Passengers were watching. She could feel their eyes, some cautious, some smug, others just curious, waiting to see how this would play out. A few had their phones out, held just low enough to look inconspicuous, but Sophia knew better. She was being recorded. Her fingers twitched at her sides, but she forced herself to straighten. If she was going down, she wouldn't do it looking weak. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her company badge. The small plastic card had been hers for years. Her access to every plane, every restricted area, every part of the job she had fought for. And now, it was worthless. Her grip on it tightened. For a brief, fleeting moment, she thought about refusing. Thought about walking off the plane without handing it over, forcing them to make a scene, forcing them to drag her out just so she could take one last shred of power for herself. But that wasn't power. That was desperation. She exhaled sharply and slammed the badge into the shorter man's hand. His expression didn't change. "Your ID as well." Sophia's jaw clenched, but she complied, pulling her ID lanyard from around her neck and tossing it to him like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was her entire career. And now, it was gone. "Thank you for your cooperation," the taller man said flatly. "Now, if you'll follow us—" Sophia's stomach twisted. This was it. The final walk. Her exit. For a split second, she thought about looking back. about glancing at Margaret one last time, just to see if there was any satisfaction, any reaction at all. But she didn't, because she already knew what she'd find. Nothing. Margaret didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to rub it in. She had already won. Sophia took a slow breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. Every step toward the exit felt heavier. The jet bridge had never seemed longer, the air never thicker. Her ears rang with the low hum of whispered voices behind her, the murmurs of passengers who would remember this moment forever, because no matter what she did next, no matter where she went, she would never outrun this. Sophia stepped off the plane, the cool, artificial air of the jet bridge hitting her like a slap. The two men flanked her on either side, silent, expressionless, efficient. They didn't need to grab her arm or force her forward. They knew she had nowhere to go. She walked stiffly, every footstep echoing too loudly in the hollow space. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out the distant hum of the airport. And then she saw them, three figures waiting just outside the jet bridge. Two in black suits. Corporate security, no doubt, but the third, Ethan Holloway. He didn't need an introduction. Sophia had never seen him in person before, but she recognized him immediately. He carried himself the way only men like him did, calm, composed, exuding quiet authority. He wasn't a man who raised his voice. He never had to. Sophia's throat went dry. Ethan's gaze flickered to her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Marshall." His voice was even, polite, but not friendly. Sophia stopped walking, instinct screaming at her to say something, to defend herself, to salvage what little dignity she had left. But what could she say to the man who had already erased her? Ethan studied her for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "You probably have a lot of things you want to say right now." Sophia tensed. He was giving her an opening, a chance. But for what? She swallowed, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I've worked for this airline for 12 years. I've put everything into this job, and now I'm being thrown out over one mistake." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Is that what you think happened?" Sophia hesitated. Ethan took a slow step forward, his hands still casually in his pockets. "Let's be clear about something, Miss Marshall. This isn't about one mistake. This is about who you are when you think no one is watching." The words hit harder than she expected. Ethan sighed. "I don't care that it was my wife you mistreated. I care that you would have done the same to anyone else who didn't fit your idea of first class." He let the words settle before continuing. "And I can't have someone like that representing my airline." Sophia clenched her jaw. "I never—" "You did," Ethan interrupted. "And you've done it before, haven't you?" Her pulse spiked. He didn't say it as a question. He already knew. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer, then straightened. "Security will escort you out. Your termination paperwork has already been processed. You are permanently banned from working for this airline in any capacity." The finality in his tone made her stomach drop. Just like that. 12 years. Gone. She should have said something. Should have fought. But there was nothing left to fight for. So she turned. And for the first time in years, she walked away with nothing. Sophia stepped into the terminal, the noise of the airport hitting her like a wall, the chatter of travelers, the hum of rolling suitcases, the distant crackle of announcements. It all felt distant, like she was moving through a tunnel. Security didn't grab her, didn't rush her. They didn't need to. Her fate had already been sealed. Her badge was gone. Her job was gone. And worst of all, everyone knew it. She could feel the stares, some discreet, some not. A few people whispered to each other, their glances flickering toward her like she was some kind of cautionary tale playing out in real time. A group of flight attendants watched from the corner, their hushed conversation stopping the moment she passed. She kept her chin up, walking with forced confidence, even as panic crawled under her skin. She needed a plan, a way to spin this, to get ahead of it before it spread too far. Her hand shot to her pocket, pulling out her phone. One call. That's all she needed. A contact, someone in the industry, someone who could help. She scrolled through her call log, her fingers shaking. She landed on a familiar name, her old supervisor from another airline. He'd always respected her. He'd vouched for her once before. Maybe, just maybe, he could do it again. She pressed the call button. It rang, twice, then voicemail. Sophia's stomach twisted. She tried another contact, then another. Same result. Her hands clenched around the phone. No, this wasn't happening. Someone had to answer. She scrolled faster, searching for anyone. A coworker, a former boss, anyone. She pressed another number. The line clicked. For a second, hope flared. Then a robotic voice spoke. "The number you are trying to reach is unavailable." Sophia's breath hitched. She tried again and again. Every call, every single one went unanswered. A slow, creeping realization settled into her bones. She wasn't being ignored. She was being cut off. The industry was small, news traveled fast, and if Ethan Holloway wanted her blacklisted, she was already gone. Her fingers loosened, her phone feeling suddenly heavy in her grip. This wasn't just about losing one job. This was about losing everything. Her career, her reputation, her entire identity. People weren't just refusing to help her. They didn't even want to be associated with her. For the first time since stepping off that plane, fear truly set in. Sophia Marshall, the woman who had once ruled first class, who had commanded respect, who had built her entire life around this career, was officially nowhere. Sophia stood motionless in the middle of the terminal, her phone limp in her hand, the weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. She had never felt this before. Not fear, not anger, nothing. She was empty. Her entire career, her reputation, her control, gone. A flight attendant walked past, barely glancing at her, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't someone worth noticing. She turned in slow motion, her feet moving without thought, her mind drowning in the realization that there was no coming back from this. The airport bustled around her, people rushing to their gates, talking, laughing, living, but not her. For the first time in years, Sophia had nowhere to be. Then, a voice, soft, steady, familiar. "You always walked through the cabin like you owned the place." Sophia froze. Slowly, she turned. Margaret Holloway, standing a few feet away, a quiet, knowing look in her eyes. Sophia's throat tightened. She should have walked away. She should have ignored her, but she couldn't. Margaret took a step closer. "Tell me, Miss Marshall," she said, her voice calm, gentle. "What are you going to do now?" Sophia opened her mouth, then stopped. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. Not for Margaret, not for herself. A lump formed in her throat. Margaret exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "You don't know, do you?" Sophia swallowed hard. She didn't, and Margaret saw it. She nodded, as if she had already expected this. Then with a soft, almost kind smile, she said, "Good." Sophia's breath caught. She didn't understand why. Why was that good? But Margaret was already turning, already walking away, blending into the sea of travelers. Sophia stood there, the words looping in her head. Good. And then, for the first time since stepping off that plane, Sophia felt something new. Not fear, not anger, something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty, a blank slate, a life, completely unwritten, and for the first time, that terrified her, but maybe, just maybe, that was the point.